Let me ask you about Google management. You spent a lot of time with these guys and with many, many executives there. Over 100? No, there's a lot of sources. I mean, 100.
I interviewed about 150 Google employees and another 150 traditional media executives.
So what's your take on management? It's very unconventional for a company of this size. What was your impression of it, and how do you think they manage with growth, and how might it work moving forward?
I think it's very unusual. It's a troika. It's three people who decide, not one CEO. Eric Schmidt is the CEO, but on major decisions, the three of them have to agree, the two co-founders and Schmidt. They share offices. Brin and Page share an office. Most people do at that company. It's a very relaxed, laid-back company. Oftentimes people don't know where Brin or Page are. So it's an unconventional management system. On the other hand, does it work? Of course it works. I mean, Google is growing and thriving, and it's a very entrepreneurial company and successful company. But in the future, you've got some real questions. They were compelled to make some changes with the financial collapse of the economy. They began to cut for the first time. They began to scale back on some of the many services and apps that they were offering. They brought a new CFO in who instilled a more rigorous management. In the future, you got questions like, are Brin and Page going to be paying as much attention now that they have families of their own? Now that they're, after all these years of working so hard, they have their own jet airplanes, maybe they want to smell the roses a little bit. So those are big questions. Will Eric Schmidt continue to stay at the company?
And with Schmidt in the book, you talk about some early period where he was not that highly thought of. But tell me, both the perception inside and outside of his effectiveness as a manager.
When Schmidt was hired in 2001, he has a PhD. He's a computer scientist, the way the two founders of Google are. So and they had gone through 12 or 13 different candidates, and finally said he's the one closest to us because he's a fellow engineer. But he was different than them. He was 20 years older. He wore a shirt and tie, not jeans and a cut-off T-shirt. And at some point, there began to be a little discomfort. He drove a Mercedes. They drove bicycles. It was a different mix there. And they went through some bumps in the first year or so of their relationship. But it's actually a pretty miraculous team that they've fashioned together. And I do not detect any deep discord between the three men.
So let's talk about potentially the weaknesses. You talk about in the book towards the end about the potential weakness of privacy, their over-reliance perhaps on computer-based search on the PC. What do you see as potentially their Achilles heels? How could they fail?
Well, I think they can fail in a number of ways. One, I interviewed Bill Gates in 1998. I began the second chapter with the story, and I said, Mr. Gates, what do you worry about in the future? And I thought he would say Apple or Sun Microsystems or Oracle or some competitor. Instead, what he said to me, he says, I'll tell you what I worry about. I worry about someone in a garage inventing something I've never thought about, a new technology. Well, in 1998, in a garage was a new technology being invented. It was the Google guys inventing search, and that has become Microsoft's worst nightmare. The question then becomes, in 2010, is there a comparable technology in a garage somewhere that's being invented that could upset and upend Google? One possibility is what's called vertical search. And the idea that, for instance, Facebook, which now has 350 million worldwide users, think about how much more efficient it is to do a search. If I'm looking for a camera and I post something from my Facebook friends, hey, I'm thinking about the Sony or Samsung or some other camera. Have any of you used it? And I get back 12 responses from people I know who have real experience. That's much more trustworthy and much more efficient than doing a Google search for that camera and getting 10,000 responses from strangers. So that's something they have to worry about. They have to worry about governments. All over the world. They're embroiled with China today, but they're embroiled with the U.S. government over privacy issues and concentration of power issues and copyright issues. And they're embroiled with the government in France and all over the world on a variety of issues. So they've got to worry about government, which is the 800-pound gorilla that can smack you down. And that gets to a third concern. Engineers are not often lack emotional intelligence. I certainly saw this at Google. In fact, at one point, Sergey Brin, when I pressed him on it, he acknowledged we lack emotional intelligence. They don't know how to gauge things they can't measure. An engineer can measure things. How do you measure fear? That people are afraid of Google's power. Or how do you measure politics in Washington? So they've been slow to respond to those concerns. And they may be slow as well to respond to public concerns about their size, as Microsoft was a decade ago. So that becomes a real potential threat to us.